All right, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming this afternoon. My name is Andrea Whitty, and I grew up in Tucson, and I run my own graphic design business in town here for the last 18 years. In addition, many of you may know me as the Connect the Dots lady, because I created a bunch of fun visual presentations to help regular busy folks understand the basics of complex topics like the economy, the federal budget, and coming soon, healthcare. I call it civics and policy basics for the busy majority. So when John Brakey here invited me to join their effort to expose corruption and protect election integrity in Pima County, it seemed like the perfect fit. After all, what's the point of me trying to educate voters to figure out what policies and what people would benefit them if the big moneyed interest in this country can flip their vote at the voting booth, not to mention go undetected and unchallenged. As the saying goes, it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes. So as the proud newcomer to this complex case, I brought a fresh set of eyes, and I tried to connect the most important dots for you in this 10-point summary, which a lot of you have a copy of on the handout, and I'm going to go through the slides. And it's a summary of the fact pattern in what I call a long saga of power and deceit in Pima County. For those like me, who didn't follow the case in detail for the last 5 years, it's a nice introduction. And for all you seasoned folks, it's a handy reminder of the highlights, or perhaps I should say lowlights, of this case. So let's go over those briefly now. Okay, so as I watched the movie Fatally Flawed that you all put together, and I read through Bill Reisner's legal brief, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, there were certain things that just stood out to me as somebody who really wasn't that familiar with the case. I heard about it a little bit. And probably what I thought was the most incriminating evidence was this crop scanner that was purchased, which is why I labeled it the smoking crop scanner. So for those of you that don't know, because I didn't know, there's this thing, and it's called a crop scanner because its only legal use is used in agriculture. Farmers use it to figure out when it's time to irrigate the fields. Well, it turns out black box voting figured out that somebody could use this little device to program the memory cards that go in these debug computerized systems. So they circulated that movie early July of 2005, warning election divisions about this possibility. Well, what happened was Pima County Elections Division goes and requisitions ones about 10 days later. They order one of these things. So the technician there admits that he purchased it, and we have a copy of the invoice, and he admits that he practiced with it and got the little memory cards that go into the precincts that record the votes, and got it to print false results out of the memory cards. And so you see a copy of that invoice right there, and I circled the date that it was purchased. So now you'd think that that would be, what possible reason would you have for purchasing one of these, unless you're planning on cheating with it? I mean, you would probably want to avoid having them even in the office, for fear that somebody might think that you did something improper. And there's a great little movie, and I think, John, you're going to try to show a clip of that. That's quite an eye-opener to see how it actually works. Okay, so we've got the copy of the invoice there. So for those of you that don't know, when the little cards that go in the precinct machines, so after everyone's done voting, at the end of the night, these little memory cards that are supposed to be programmed by the election division go into the precinct voting machines, and they're supposed to record. Like for the RTA vote, there was only, I think, 4 things on the ballot. It was a pretty simple ballot, you know, yeses and nos. So when they're legally programmed, it's very rare for these memory cards to fail. So at the end of the night, they're supposed to all be put in the machines and uploaded to the main computer. It's very rare for them to fail. Well, the night of the RTA election, at least 75 and as many as 149 out of a total of 368 total precincts, scanners failed that night. Well, that was the tip-off to Jim here, to John here and Jim, that something was wrong, because it's known that if you don't use the crop scanner properly, it will cause memory cards to fail. So that was what tipped them off. And further than that, for several days after the election, 85 memory card vote results were downloaded at least 2 times, and some I think up to 6 times, which is very unusual, overwriting the original vote totals. And contrary to normal practices, the election database was not backed up that night at the end of the election. It was not backed up until 3 days later, after all of those reloads. And, you know, we allege that they didn't want to establish a vote count the night of the election because then there would be a different result 3 days later, so they were trying to get everything in order before they actually did that. So that backed it up. So now the other thing is about the poll tape. So these are how all the things link together. We've got the crop scanner linking to these failed memory cards. Okay, so now at the close of each election, each precinct scanner prints out what's called a poll tape. It looks like a little cash register receipt that comes out of that machine from the little memory card that gets plugged in. And it's supposed to be legally signed by the officials at each precinct and sealed in the official clear ballot envelope. And from what I understand, they've been kind of lax about that in Pima County, but it is the Arizona statute that they're supposed to be signed and sealed to make them the official ballot count. Now, if the crop scanner is not done carefully, poll tapes can reveal that memory cards were programmed to print these false results. So, of course, the legal team here in fighting these cases, they're like, we want to see these poll tapes because there might be some printed evidence there that this was not the actual results. So after much resistance from Pima County Elections Division and lengthy litigation, the poll tapes were produced. But 112 out of those 368 were missing, and 50 failed to match the final statement of votes cast, which is the official vote. That's a whopping 44% out of the poll tapes there was something wrong with. And those missing poll tapes strongly correlate with the memory cards that were reloaded that night. Okay, so that's, you know, how one might connect the dots and explain what happened at the precincts. But about half people do early voting by mail. So, what happened there? Well, it was known that the same computer technician at Pima County Elections regularly took home backup CDs of the voting election database of those early votes. And this Diebold Global Elections Management System, which they use, also known as GEMS, suffers from a well-known and serious security defect, namely that its Microsoft database format, this MDB format, files that can easily be manipulated away from the election computer using something as simple as Microsoft Access. Then the manipulated backup copy can be taken back to the main computer in the election office, overwrite the data that's on there, and get this, erase the audit log so you don't even know that somebody was in there. So it leaves no trace that anything was tampered with, and it's basically a system that's designed to cheat. We also know that as a supporter of the RTA tax increase, County Administrator Charles Huckleberry, who also controls and directs Pima County Elections Division, hired a consultant to analyze precinct data from prior failed bond elections. This data would be essential to ensure that rig numbers appear plausible, right? You would want us to be able to go, well, we could probably split maybe 50 votes over here and nobody's going to question it. If you did too many votes in a precinct that was clearly against it, that might be suspicious. So you'd want to have that kind of data. And interestingly enough, a consultant was hired to mine just that kind of data and put it together. Another dot to connect. And then, of course, there's the forbidden access manual that we're going to see a photo that showed up in the election tabulation room that night. So we have a photograph that, if you want to flip to that so they can kind of see, and somebody saw it. It was actually Ted Downing, who had been running for office that season, or was going to be running in the fall, correct? Or I think mine might be going out. Okay. Okay, so he saw it, and then it was also photographed. and verified that that's because they asked them to come out and say, what is that book that you have in there? Now, why is that important? Because it was being used that night by the same computer county elections operator. And because that GEM software I was talking about is built on that Microsoft Access database platform, use of Microsoft Access in an election computer was and is illegal because it enables that backdoor manipulation of data, something this computer technician had been trained in since 1996. So this is the same computer technician that had been taking the backup copies home at night, these CDs, and then bringing them back and doing who knows what was he doing at home. And there's the belief now is that when things were going haywire the night of the election, frantically trying to get those memory cards to upload, frantically trying to get things to match. So he's got the Microsoft Access manual out in the election room, even though that was completely illegal, because I think he was kind of learning on the job here. Here's the other thing that was illegal. To prevent unfair advantage from knowledge of early ballot vote totals, it's a felony to print what's called a summary report of actual vote totals. So as those early votes are coming in by mail, they're scanned and they're actually totaled up in the computer. But it's illegal to print out what's called a summary report of what the totals are, because that would be very valuable information for either side to figure out, hey, which precinct should we target with robocalls or advertising. So it's illegal to print that. Makes sense. Until 1 hour after the polls close. But Pima County Elections, the same computer technician, was seen regularly printing and sharing these unlawful summary reports, including during the RTA election. As a matter of fact, an unofficial, unaudited rubber stamp was even purchased and used to distinguish these illegal reports. So another dot to connect. Again, after lengthy litigation and finally being awarded access to this RTA election database, it took, and Bill's going to talk about that, finally getting access where the court ruled that the Democratic Party and the other parties that were plaintiffs in this case could pick up their copies of the election database, which were basically 2 hard drives that were sealed in a brown box with a copy of the court order saying these are not to be, the seal is not to be broken, both parties are supposed to be picking it up at the same time. It was all done with very official. Well, when the plaintiffs go to pick up their box with these hard drives in it, they're told by the court clerk that the box had already been picked up. Turns out the box was sitting in the office of one of the suspects, in an unlocked file cabinet of one of the suspects, who then produces it after making the plaintiffs go through all this rigmarole to come pick it up. It was sitting in his office. So again, broken chain of custody. We don't know what was tampered with in those databases or if we got a copy of what actually happened. Again, more suspicious activity. So then Attorney General Terry Goddard finally got involved and said he would do some sort of investigation, but what he does is he teams up with the suspects for basically a limited investigation. So the tests that were run on the database were tests that were suggested by the suspects. So of course they knew they were tests that they could pass. It would be kind of like telling people at work the day of the drug test, well, they'll make sure they're drug-free. It's why, it's why DUI stops, they don't announce where they're going to be, because then people would just avoid them, pretty obvious. So other tests that were logical and would have been useful were not run. In addition, the report was then intentionally kept away from everyone except the suspects who were allowed to see it until Attorney General Goddard released it in his press conference. And finally, the last dot to connect was, the legal team here was working for years to get the poll tapes, to get access to the database. Everything was a fight. Just when the plaintiff was about to be awarded release of those poll tapes so that they could be examined, all of a sudden, Attorney General Goddard suddenly secured a secret court order to transport those RTA paper ballots up to Phoenix, up to Maricopa County. And he said he was going to conduct a hand count. But the plaintiff alleges that the hand count was really just a dog and pony show, kind of like the investigations, orchestrated to produce the desired results. The ballots were not counted by precinct and matched up to the poll tapes, which would be important to see, if there was any falsifying of records there. Nor was there any forensic examination of the paper and aimed to determine if the ballot boxes had then been stuffed to try to match the electronic official record, because Pima County is known to have a system called print-on-demand ballots where they can print more ballots out of their office. And often those are not on the same paper, and you can tell, as somebody in the printing business, you can tell if something's been printed on a, lithography printed, the way ballots at precincts are, and the way the early vote-in ballots are done, as opposed to the print-on-demand, which would be some sort of inkjet or laser printer. And I believe, John, you told me when people were watching the hand count that was done up in Maricopa County, some of the boxes normally have about 950 ballots in a box, would be a full box. Some of these boxes that they were counting out of had 1,600 in them. Well, the only way that can happen is if the paper is thinner. So that would be another suspicious dot to connect. Okay, so this is why we ask that the court must intervene at this point, because we have a system designed to cheat, and the computers are impossible to challenge a rigged election, because in the state of Arizona, surprisingly, I did not know this, but it is illegal to do a hand count of all the ballots. So we need to have some sort of relief from the court to step in to secure the purity of our elections, so people have confidence in our elections, and Bill's going to talk about that a little bit more. So let me just introduce everybody else, and I'll let Bill take it from there, but I kind of wanted to just set the stage for everybody. So the main reason you might ask is why this case has gotten so much further than most other election fraud cases all around the country, because they've got these computerized elections, this kind of stuff is going on all over, and we've got a presidential election coming up, and a lot of people were very suspicious about the Florida election and the Ohio election in 2004. The reason why this case has gotten so far is basically because of the group of people that have gotten involved. And we've got the courage and expertise and dogged determination of a team right here in Tucson. So in particular, we have John Brakey and Jim March over there, and Mickey Donahue, who's not here right now, who have provided incredible knowledge about computerized election processes and programming. You could call them Tucson's own election integrity geek squad. And of course, there's Bill Reisner, the longtime Tucson attorney, who provides the all-important legal expertise needed to challenge Pima County Elections Division's corrupt power structure and to navigate the case through the courts. If you think about it, I mean, a lot of people, there's a lot of computer geeks out there, but if you don't have the legal savvy to figure out how to keep pushing this case along, because a lot of this has been done in the court system, you're just not going to get very far. So as an attorney who has spent his life defending the little guy against big corporations, Bill is no stranger to a tough fight. His experience as a voluntary party observer in local elections revealed how susceptible the whole process is to fraud, especially the computerized systems that are designed to cheat. So now he spends much of his time fighting to protect the purity of elections and public confidence in election results, the cornerstone of our democracy. In short, as our election integrity warrior, you might say Bill provides the muscle in this case. And the other person that provides the muscle is Ralph Ellenwood, who's right over there. And he's the one whose counterclaim on behalf of the Libertarian Party made the allegations of fraud. The Libertarian Party has played an important role in election verification. When the Democratic Party refused to appeal Judge Harrington's ruling of no jurisdiction because it might embarrass the man whose name cannot be mentioned, the Libertarian Party and its lawyer, Ralph Ellenwood, kept the fight going. Ralph and Bill are co-counsel in this lawsuit. Ralph has been a fighter for justice through his exemplary career from service as a county attorney in Grant County, New Mexico, to work as a public defender in Tucson and now in private practice. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the experts here, to Bill Reisner. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It's Ralph in the suit back there that looks like a lawyer. Kind of interesting. We all have maybe some little family events, maybe Christmas is big at our house or some other event. And I was over at Ralph's house one time. Every July 4th, he has his family and friends, they have a big barbecue, and his tradition is they read the Declaration of Independence. And, you know, there was a pleading filed the other day by Pima County's lawyer in court. And she talked about me and about how, of course, this case has taken a while because the county has a $1.9 billion budget, so there's no shortage of money. And they were able to convince the Superior Court judge that the court had no jurisdiction to even hear a case of fraud, even with absolute proof. He said the courts couldn't hear it. So we had to go to the Court of Appeals. And in the Court of Appeals, we won. They said, yes, the court can hear it. But then Pima County said, we want to rehear it because, you know, they've only shown that we cheated once, and that they haven't alleged that we'd do this again. And then that didn't work, so then they asked the Supreme Court to review it, and eventually it came back in Superior Court. And then the lawyer, she says, I don't understand why these lawyers just don't let it go. And you know what Ralph does with reading the Declaration of Independence, and the way that I'm motivated, or John Brakey and the rest of us, we can't let it go. You know, the fundamental rock that we have in America is that we vote. And the absolute key is that votes have to be counted. And they have to be counted accurately. And if they're not counted accurately, then everything's open. You know, the RTA was a 20-year program for $2 billion because we needed roads for developers on the outside of town and so forth. And maybe that's a thing the public would agree with. Maybe when the county comes back with a proposal to have a unified water district, so Tucson's water can go everywhere, maybe that's something the public will want. There are very serious matters that come before the public, and we absolutely have to have accurate vote counts. And there is no assurance on any county election that any votes are accurate. That's absolutely the case. You know, I filed a pretty thick disclosure statement, and the important aspect for us, what we need to show in this case, is that there is no remedy for cheating, and that the court has to provide a remedy. We're not going to be able to roll back this election, but we do want the judge to order things that can make sure, there are ways we can make sure that the votes are accurately counted. And it's a huge problem because the way it is in Arizona, and probably a lot of states, is that to challenge an election, and this is something that may interest people, but for instance, in the United States Constitution, there's nothing in there about the right to vote. You bring it out and read it sometime. It's just not there. It's a state issue. Now, it's true that in states, if they give you the right to if they give you, if you have the right to vote, you know, they have to make it kind of like fair, and you'd think maybe they need to count it fair. But it's really not in that federal constitution. So it's a matter of our state legislature and our state constitution. And our state constitution, of course, says that elections have to be pure and they have to be fair. But how do you challenge an election? How do you, what we call, contest an election contest? Well, the legislature has provided some rules. And the rule is that you need to file an election contest within 5 days. Within 5 days of when it's called a canvass, when the Board of Supervisors says, here's the final election, here's the vote totals. And our original state, our state statutes provide, and of course the original elections, had paper ballots that were counted. And the statute says that you count them at each precinct publicly. You go watch, they're being counted, and they declare the results. But the law has been changed over time, so that now that counting at the precinct occurs with the memory card computer device. So nobody looks at the paper, and you can't look at the paper. It's the law in Arizona. You are prohibited from looking at the paper. There was an election a few years ago in a primary, in a Republican primary in Phoenix. Maybe 20,000 votes. One guy was declared winner initially. One guy won by 4 votes. So they said, well, we have to do a recount. And incidentally, in Arizona, we don't allow recounts unless it's what's called an automatic recount if it's 0.1%. Otherwise, no recounts. That's it. So this was really close. So the two candidates and the election director in Maricopa County said, well, look, gee, there's, we've got all these ballots here. Let's just count them. We think we need this thing to be accurate. Jan Brewer, who was the Secretary of State, sent a memo over and says, absolutely, stop, you can't do it. I'm Secretary of State, you can't do it. Because you can't look at the paper ballots. You've got to run them through the machine again. So they ran them through the machine again. One guy ends up winning by the other guy by 13 votes. It's okay, it's 4-13. But then they looked at the numbers and there were 486 votes that weren't counted the first time by the same ballots. And no one today knows what happened with those ballots. And people wanted to find out. Jack Harper, a state senator in Phoenix, who was in charge of the committee in the legislature, he sent a subpoena over, said, bring me the ballot so we can look at them in the legislature. They arranged to have the FBI pick them up and keep them away from the legislature, away from the public, and then send them back later so they could be destroyed and no one's ever looked at them. But the testimony from the election director, Karen Osborne in Maricopa County, she testified that one of the machines was 18.3% off error rate, which she said was within the expected, was within the range you might say. But no one knows what happened or why, because you've got to take what the machine says. So let me ask you, we got some smart people here. In 5 days, how do you challenge a computerized election by filing a complaint that specifically alleges how the outcome would have been different? You can't do it. So a few years ago, we got the election activists and through efforts of Ted Downing and the right-wing Senator Jack Harper, we got some legislation passed with some hand counts. But Pima County was lobbying and said, don't allow hand counts of county races. So when they have that bond election come up, when there's the Board of Supervisors running, there are no hand counts. So you can't see the ballots. You can't get the data. You can't get the data in 5 days. On behalf of the Democratic Party, I wrote statewide, I wrote a letter that Ted Downing signed, actually, because he was the head of the election committee, that we sent all the counties in Arizona and said, we have a lawsuit we want in Pima County that requires your county electronic database to be turned over to us. You know, please send it within this period of time. Not one county. You can't get it. Jim March sent a letter to Maricopa County, where 60% of our votes or more in this state are, right? More, right? Almost 2/3. Maricopa says you can't get our electronic data ever because the private company that has the computer code for our elections, the data of the elections also has part of their code in it, and it's a proprietary secret. So here we are. The Citizens United case says an unlimited amount of corporate money can go into elections. You know, I've seen figures that are expecting $3 billion to be spent on this presidential election. We've got maybe 2 or 3 companies coincidentally owned by right-wing billionaires, but 2 or 3 private companies that control the codes that tell us, coming out of the black box, who wins our elections in this country. So, you know, it's very interesting for us what happened with the RTA, but mostly because we need to show what happened in the RTA to be able to protect other elections. We've proven that the Pima County Attorney's Office will defend county management to the hilt. The Attorney General won't do anything about it. There's nothing anybody can do about these things except a judge. We'll see what happens with the judge. The county's had great success in convincing them that this really isn't their job. You know, that's what we see in the U.S. now. That's not my job. It's this guy. That must be their job. That's not the Attorney General. It's somebody else's. I took the deposition of the Secretary of State. Speaking of it not being someone's job, you might think that the Secretary of State knew something about what's going on with computers, since every county uses computers to count the ballots. The official position of the Arizona Secretary of State is they have no legal jurisdiction to examine what goes on in any computer. Worse than that. I can't get worse than that, but just another side from that is our Secretary of State actually has rules on how that computer should be protected. So I asked the office, do you check on that? Well, no, we aren't allowed to look to even see if the computer itself is protected. We're not allowed to do that. It's not our job. And I asked them, well, what's going on in that machine with the code? And they said, well, we take the word of the vendors. We take the word of those companies. And the code that the companies use have not been tested anywhere for security. There are a couple of the national companies called Cyber and Wiley that have looked at, like, here's the way it works. Let's say Depot goes into, I forget, it's either Cyber or Wiley, and then they go to one of these companies and say, we need our code approved. And here's the contract. Your results will be secret because it's proprietary. And we want you to look at this part of it, but not the other part, because that's off the shelf, so you don't need to look at that. And don't bother looking at security. Sure enough, the company that they picked and hired, sort of like on Wall Street, if you want someone to say that this crap you're selling is good, you hire the right guy. So they, you know, got the report back, it's approved. Then later the guy said, well, yeah, no one told us to look at security. Nobody's looked at security. Absolutely haven't. And then later the federal government told Cyber and Wiley, you know, you guys, we're not even going to allow you to look at this stuff again because you did such a poor job. And then the company says, well, yeah, but Debo lied to us. They told us this was off the shelf, and so we didn't look at it, and we didn't know, you know, that sort of thing. So from all the way to the top to bottom, it's rotten. And in Pima County, we have a special problem because, you know, the growth lobby is the gorilla behind the fence here that runs local politics. Chuck Huckleberry's their guy, and those of you who have seen his management style, he's very good. He's very much in control, and very much is the manager for that team. And he totally runs the election department. He picked our election director, who reports to him, orally, of course, nothing's in writing. These are all, you know, little personal chats that I can't quite recall what, you know, were going on. You have trouble, but that's, you know, that's the way it works. And our Board of Supervisors purportedly has no involvement in this stuff. We had a situation where I represent the Democratic Party, and what we wanted to do was look at the database. And incidentally, the involvement of the Democratic Party had nothing, nothing to do with the RTA. No one was concerned or thought about the RTA. But we wanted data from the county to find out what had been going on with elections. And the county fought like a dog with no reason. They had none. We had a meeting and we said, what's your reason, what's the security reason for giving to the Democratic Party the data past elections? Well, they had one reason, actually. John Moffett says, because if you got the database, you would know the codes that our one guy operator uses, and although you can't access the machine, but somehow you could figure out, it might help you, we don't know how, but it might help you hack in the future. And then that's, Mickey Donahoe said, well, are these the codes, John? Wow, yeah, how did you get them? So, well, I downloaded them from the Secretary of State's public website. And, you know, I'm not a computer literate guy at all, you know, it's sort of interesting. So when someone's telling me, oh, we got special codes, you know, I keep thinking, wow, man, you know, I wonder what these codes are. And so later on in the case, you know, we find out what the codes are. This candidate is 20. This candidate is 30. The guy can just come up with numbers he wants, and those are the codes. But he said, you know, because maybe he could, you know, could figure out what numbers he decided to come up with that would predict what he might do in an election with different numbers. Totally bonkers. But when that was off the table, then we said, okay, what's your other reason? Well, we don't have one, but still, I'm resolute you can't have it, even though I can't think of any reason. The county probably spent more than $1 million to keep us from getting the database. And at trial, What's your number one reason, Captain? And the trialist question is of John Moffat, who's a very important guy. Because Chuck Huckleberry says he doesn't really, in spite of being an engineer, he doesn't know anything about computers or elections. And he relies on John Moffat. Whatever John says, that's cool. And the Board of Supervisors say, Huckleberry says, they have nothing to do with this decision not to give you this. 3 Democrats on the Board of Supervisors have nothing to do with the request from the Democratic Party and a lawsuit from the Democratic Party, because they're relying on Chuck, who's relying on John. Okay, John, what is it? He said, well, if you have the database in future elections, here's the deal. After the election's over, and after there's a canvass, if the Democrats have a copy, and the Libertarians have a copy, and the Republicans have the copy, the Democrats might print their own set of results because they'll know the font and the page layout, and that may create disruptions. Okay? So let me tell you, if you go through what we went through with that lawsuit, and I have never seen as fiercely fought lawsuit as that one. And at the end, you get that kind of bullshit in your face, you say, whoa, they're hiding something really big. And what they're hiding is the RTA. And I'm telling you, they fought incredible. There was a picture earlier of that manual, the access manual. Bob Gilby was down, just took a picture of the manual. So since they're fighting everything, we listed Bob Gilby as a witness to testify that he took the picture and that's an accurate picture as to what he was looking at. He's what we call a foundational witness. I have sued major corporations, major insurance companies, millions of dollars involved. I've never heard of anyone deposing a foundational photographer. Pima County, with 2 lawyers, took Bob's deposition for 3 hours. At every deposition, they had 4 lawyers, except for Bob. He only got 3. But it's absolutely, mind-blowing. Brady, he got the treatment because you can depose a witness for 4 hours. He got his 4 hours. Jim, he got his 4 hours, and they wanted everything in his computer to review beforehand. And I think he gave them a gig and a half or whatever that was. It's absolutely unbelievable. And you get to the end of the line, and there's nothing there. And then that was the case where they filed in court the pleading saying they couldn't even talk to anybody in the election department because they thought everybody would take the fifth. Well, we learned, of course, there are very good employees who are very honest people that work there, except the rather key inside group where we learned the opposite about them. So, if you look around, you'll see, in terms of the local press, all the people that are missing and not here, which is really kind of interesting because what we're talking about, you would think, would be fundamental. The Republican Party pretty much has opposed taking a different position. They've supported the county. It's been the Democratic Party until they determined that it would be embarrassing to Terry Goddard, and then they dropped out. And then the Libertarians, fortunately, have picked up the banner. And the Libertarians, I want to say, have been very important for election integrity. The state statute that permits hand counts of some races. It's a very good thing, but it's not good enough, but it's good. Requires 2 political parties to participate. The Republicans won't participate and the Greens won't participate. But luckily, the Libertarians have participated with the Democratic Party, and it's certainly an honor to participate with them, and an honor to participate with Ralph Ellenwood in this case. Yeah. You want to give us some remarks, Ralph, or are you like sitting there?
I was going to say, now that we're hopeless and depressed, what can we do about it? What's the remedy we're going to ask for in this case?
Well, the remedy, what we want to get at is graphic scanning. There are a couple of programs, and the way this works is when the paper ballots that the humans can't look at and can't come in, if we get them at the central location, there are high-speed scanners that can take those ballots and, in essence, take a picture of each one as it goes by. You know, they can even put a little number on it so you can find them. And then when you've got a picture of all the ballots, then you can release those to the political parties, put them on the internet, and everybody can see the actual ballots and count the actual ballots. And so there's a group out of Humboldt County, California, that developed a system that has open source software. There's a Clear Ballot group. I think there may be another group that has worked on it. The Clear Ballot group has a very good, very sophisticated system where that you can independently, and it's key that to have an independent group instead of your own election department doing this, but they work with the election department and work with the observers. They take pictures of all the ballots, and then they're there. And then you can use one of those programs. If you don't like that, write your own program. Stay up all night, count the race that you want to count. And it dramatically cuts down on their ability to cheat, because anyone can see the ballots and count the ballots. It's really a fairly simple, elegant thing. So what's going on in this lawsuit is not who goes to jail, but whether we can stop them from cheating in the future. It's the right to cheat that's at stake. And when you see them fight this thing like a dog, you know that what they're fighting for is the right to cheat.